All right, it is Friday, December 12th, 2025. Welcome to the Borderlines podcast, a Canadian immigration law podcast. And this episode is sort of a follow up to one that we recently did, episode 183, with Cory Moore, a retired Canadian Forces member who is now passionately involved in trying to rescue, resettle, whatever words you want to use, several former female Afghan prosecutors. And we got some interesting feedback from that episode, including an introduction to our guests today, who are from the charity Aman Lara. And we will get to what Aman Lara does. Essentially, it provides refugee resettlement services. It's a very broad description. I'm going to ask you to describe it in more detail in a bit, but I first want to introduce our three guests. The first, John Feltham, who served 23 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, mostly with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. He's done tours of Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Cyprus, and is now the executive director of Aman Lara. Julia Aitken, who has just an extensive career in program management, project research, and a passion for social justice. And she is the program and communications director of Aman Lara. And finally, we are joined by Denis Thompson. Or do you go by your title still, or do you just go for like major retired? Is it like MPs where you always stick with your title, or major general retired?
I answer to just about anything,
Just about anything.
as long as it doesn't cause me to be late for dinner.
I'll go with Denis. Denis served 39 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, including, for most notably for our purpose today, he was involved in the command of NATO's Task Force Kandahar in 2008 and 9, Canada's Special Operation Forces 2011 to 2014, and you were involved in the evacuation of thousands and thousands of Afghans from Afghanistan after, I guess, the NATO involvement there ended. So thank you, everyone, for coming on. It's probably the most guests we've had on the show at one go. And what I want to do to sort of guide the conversation is, as we were talking about before we went on air, there's been a few federal court cases recently led by Maureen Silkoff involving people who are essentially left behind or fell through the cracks, or different words, of Canada's efforts to resettle Afghanistan or Afghans in Canada after the fall of Kabul in 2021. The case name that will sort of guide our conversation is HNV Canada Citizenship and Immigration, 2025 FC 1801. And how I think I will start is just by reading the first three paragraphs of that decision. And then maybe both John and Denis can kind of describe their experiences in Afghanistan, how they came to interact with locals there. I know that we got some positive feedback when Cory Moore did the same. And I think it'd be valuable for our audience to do it here. So just the first three paragraphs to sort of set the stage of how Canada wound up in Afghanistan and how the issues that we are discussing today arose. Quoting from the judgment, the principal applicant is an Afghan national who operated a store located on the boardwalk of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Air Base Camp in Kandahar, Afghanistan, from 2004 to 2008. The air base was primarily made up of Canadian troops with whom the principal applicant interacted on a regular basis. Beginning in 2005, the principal applicant says that he and members of his family received regular threats while working on the NATO air base and at their home, which caused the principal applicant to leave Kandahar and temporarily relocate to Kabul. After the principal applicant left his job at the NATO air base in 2008, he worked as a supplier for a store until he started his own business in 2011. The principal applicant continued to maintain his relationships with clients on the NATO airbase. The principal applicant explains that after American troops were found to burn copies of the Quran in February 2012, hostility grew towards anyone who had any perceived affiliation with foreign forces. He claims that protesters came to his family home on February 24, 2012, looking for him as, quote, the infidel and person who had worked in the air base with Canadian and NATO troops, end quote. They attacked and injured the principal applicant's elder brother, after which the principal applicant and his nephew went into hiding. Those are the first 3 paragraphs of the story of the case. As I mentioned last episode, Cory Moore described how he came to be in Afghanistan. After that episode, a few people emailed to tell their stories. And so maybe, John, you can go first in sort of just how you came to be in Afghanistan and why you're passionate about this area now and helping people now.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So first thing I can say here is like that case itself is not in isolation of thousands of other cases that we work with on a daily, if not the last 4 years progressively. What I can say from my end is that I started this a bit different and unique to others. I actually started working with Afghans based on the fact that, as you stated in that specific case, that the individual maintained their relationships with the people they worked with from the Kandahar Air Base. The same thing with me as a soldier who served on the ground in Afghanistan in 2006 as a part of the NATO response and one of Canada's first missions in the country. I did maintain a lot of relationships with the interpreters, cooks, cleaners. Like it didn't matter. I was pretty openly engaged with a bunch of them. And I kept coordination with them over the years. And when the US announced a complete pullout of Afghanistan in the earlier part of 2021, I think around the April timeframe, all those individuals started reaching out to me that I had maintained contact with, pretty much saying help. It went through Facebook, LinkedIn, just about every social media platform they could find me on, they found me on, and they reached out to me. I actually kind of developed a little, my wife calls it like an operations center in my basement. And I set up shop for the better part of 4 or 5 months, which led up to the August of 2021 crisis itself, where thousands of these Afghans were trying to get out. I was watching what was happening with some of the other NGOs working in the space, specifically the organization that I'm now the executive director of. And I found that they were not being successful in trying to get people out in a fluent fashion. So I started developing other means to move people out by using other assets that were in the region, specifically the US, France, the Dutch, and any other country I could possibly get a hold of to help out. And I ended up working with them. And what I was doing was having buses show up at various locations in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and drive these people with coordination to the different forces. Now, I tried to get a hold of the Canadian forces and the Canadian entities on the ground in Afghanistan, and I had no success at all. Because what I was trying to do was get people, I got them into the airport where thousands were trying to get in. I got them into the airport. All somebody had to do was drive across the airport or the tarmac, pick them up and bring them and put them on a Canadian plane. That didn't happen. So I ended up moving about 350 individuals. I think it was about 35 families in total, some very large families to begin with. And they ended up in various locations like Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark. A few ended up in Ukraine. I had probably 100 of them, if not 150 of them, ended up in the United States. And then I progressively worked for months after to move them out of that to that country. What I would think is best to do at this point would be to hand it over to Denis, because he was part of the coordinating factor from a group called the Afghan Strategic Evacuation Team that did the brunt of the work in coordinating all these people, including bringing me into the picture months after.
Thanks for the handoff, John. You want me to carry on from here? Excellent. All right. First of all, my name's pronounced Denis, like Dennis Thatcher. If you know Margaret Thatcher, you'll know her husband spelt his name with one N, and so do I. Right. So I went to Afghanistan in 2008 as the task force commander for all of Kandahar. So I had responsibility for some 2,800 Canadians and some 700 or so Americans and a smattering of other NATO forces. So clearly I had a direct connection to the Afghan population, and I managed to cover 16,500 kilometers in a LAV all across the province, visiting various districts and engaging with Afghans. And the only way you can engage with an Afghan is if you have someone to interpret for you. And an interpreter is not a translator. An interpreter interprets everything from the language to the culture, etc., so you don't step on many of the hidden landmines that are out there. And so you inevitably develop a relationship, just as John mentioned, with them. The difference between my experience and John's is that I was connected with what are called language and cultural advisors, and those are Canadian citizens of Afghan origins. And the reason senior commanders use them is because they can be given a security clearance, and they can be brought in inside, literally inside the tent, and have things explained to them. So I'm quite connected to that crowd, but I am also indebted to all of those interpreters who worked at the coalface that I saw every day, whether it was at a combat outpost or a forward operating base. I got involved in, as John just explained, when we found out that the US was pulling out in the spring of 2021. And then my phone didn't ring as a result of all the contacts that John would have had. It rang from people like John, all of the veterans who were absolutely aghast that we were pulling the carpet out from underneath these people. And so in conjunction with two other generals, my good friends Dave Fraser and Dean Milner, we wrote a letter, an open letter to the Minister of Immigration, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I don't know if we copied the Prime Minister, but we probably did. And I still have that letter dated the 8th of July, 2021, asking for some help. And what happened immediately after that is in August, the government instituted the special immigration measures. And I'd like to think that it's our letter pushed them over the mark, but I don't think I'm I don't have that much hubris in me. It was probably because there was an election on the horizon and they wanted to be seen to be doing the right thing. Nevertheless, that allowed us, then we got directly engaged, the three of us, and certainly Aman Lara was one of those organizations, but it was mostly at the start Afghan Canadian interpreters run by an excellent lady named Wendy Long, who's still involved in this space. And along with her, Aman Lara, an organization called Building Markets and Journalists for Human Rights, we knit together a group called, as John pointed out, the Afghan Strategic Evacuation Team in an effort to coordinate all of our work and to help each other in getting people out of the country. And that went on over the late summer and autumn and into the autumn of 2021 and into the winter of 2022, where what we were principally doing was making sure that we could get people into safe houses in Kabul before they were onward evacuated through the Torkham border crossing and into Islamabad and Pakistan. And so that's how it all started. And it's worth noting here that the founder of Aman Lara is a gentleman named Drummond Fraser, and he was instrumental in getting this thing off the ground in the early days. Since then, Aman Lara is largely transitioned, and I'm not going to go into the details of the transition, except to say that we've been very successful in evacuating people from Afghanistan and a few from Ukraine. Somewhere in the vicinity north of 7,000 people have been evacuated, over 5,800 settled, and there are still people in the queue. My colleagues here can speak to the exact numbers, but it's somewhere around 700. We, right from the start, we were just an NGO, and we took a lot of time to make sure that we could get a charitable application through and get our charitable status, which we succeeded in doing in 2025. And I'm now happy to say that I'm co-chairing the board of Aman Lara alongside of Janice Fisher, and we continue to examine not just Afghanistan and the case that you're talking about, but also the crises in the Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan. And I'll sum it up there and pass it back to you, either Stephen or Dina.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good, I forgot to mention that at the start, that Aman Lara is a registered charity for anyone looking for a charity to donate to. This one certainly, I don't want to like This one, and the more that I've read about it, the more it seems different, and B, especially for those who listened to and have emailed since the previous episode that we did, who are looking to contribute and to help with these relocation efforts. Aman Lara is a registered charity. Julie, maybe you can describe, before we get back to the specifics of this case, the delays and ongoing issues, a little bit more about just what Aman Lara does.
Yep, for sure. So part of my work, obviously, is helping to guide and shape the organization as we move into that next chapter. So when we became a registered charity it was March of 2025, so very recently, it allowed us to move beyond that crisis response space and build out a more deliberate program model. So we've essentially grounded that in 4 key pillars. So the first one would be safe passage, protection, and assistance. So that remains the foundation of our work, and that's under that pillar is where some of our programming still resides to support a select number of high-risk cases from Afghanistan. A lot of that is done in partnership and collaboration with other organizations in this space that are working with those populations in order to continue to provide support. But also a number of the cases that fall under this pillar are also kind of woven into what we call our Path to Protection initiative. So that essentially focuses on supporting displaced Afghans or other at-risk women, girls, and youth who have clear pathways to come to Canada. So we've supported a number of cases so far under that, one of which is an 18-year-old young Afghan woman who is also a Canadian citizen, who was taken from Afghanistan when she was 14. She was denied her education, her basic freedoms and rights, and she also was faced with the threat of forced marriage. So after nearly 3.5 years or so, she was finally able to return home to Canada this past September through our work in conjunction with our on-the-ground team and a colleague that we have within the consular operations at Global Affairs Canada. Another case, 16-year-old twins who were orphaned after their father was killed by Taliban fighters who ambushed him after he was trying to seek medical care for their older sister. And again, with the support of all the various partners that we work with, the twins actually arrived this morning in Canada. So that's another example of the types of cases that we're trying to support through this Path to Protection initiative. We have a number of others that are currently in process, so I won't go into detail about those, but that is essentially where we are with those efforts. Cases like that, our teams, they support safe movement, help with shelter, helping with basic needs for families and individuals that are awaiting travel, supporting them through documentation and immigration processes, which we all know is very complex, liaising with government partners, and then arranging all of the travel and logistics around that. Again, none of this would be made possible without the regional partners and other organizations that we work with in order to make sure that these cases move through responsibly and safely. So the impact of our previous work in Afghanistan, this current work, has all shaped what's an emerging collaboration right now that we have with a number of physicians across Canada, Médecins Sans Frontières, and community partners to build out a clinically governed medical evacuation initiative or pathway for a very small number to start of critically injured Palestinian children from Gaza. So that effort builds on the work that's already, you may or may not be familiar with, under the leadership of Premier Kinu in Manitoba. They have currently supported, I believe it's 3 cases they've brought to the province so far. So we have been in consultation with their team, gathered a lot of lessons learned, and this is all ongoing consultation and collaborations as we continue to develop that model. So that is something that we're working on right now. Our second pillar is economic empowerment and integration. So this right now includes collaboration with an organization called Helmets to Hard Hats. So that was essentially put in place to connect Afghans with meaningful careers in the skilled trades. And then we have our economic mobility initiative called Horizon Hope. So that's the EMPP focused initiative called Horizon Hope. We were engaged in that by the direct request of IRCC. They approached the organization, I think it was 2023, John. It was pre my time. So I think it was initially in 2023. As a way in which that the organization could continue to support Afghans who never received an invitation to apply under the Special Immigration Measures Program or who were in waiting. At the time, I understand the organization, obviously was still focused on the evacuation work and capacity levels within. It didn't make sense for the organization to get engaged, but as the Special Immigration Measures Program was approaching expiry, which was December 31st, 2024, it became clear that this could be a principled and viable way that we could continue to support those individuals with those enduring ties to Canada. And it essentially became one of the major turning points for the organization or for our evolution as we started to look at additional ways in which we could work. And then pillar number 3 would be advocacy and system change. So that is essentially a lot of the collaboration and discussion work that we do with other organizations, looking at strengthening different frameworks and systems, addressing structural barriers for displaced populations. And then the 4th pillar would be education and capacity building. So that includes a free online skills training program that was, again, implemented pre my time with the organization, but essentially free to Afghan and Ukrainian refugees, so to help them rebuild their careers and adapt to the Canadian labor market.
What?
Steve said
go ahead, Dan.
No worries. Steve said something about the very unique nature of the various initiatives that Aman Lara has undertaken, and this is something that Cory Moore spoke about.
Here, Deanna, your mic's fading a bit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
So I think I know, though, that the question that you're going to ask, just because I think it's the same that I had, which is sort of the unique nature of both Aman Lara and Afghanistan. What is it about the Afghan interpreters that seems to have struck such a chord, especially amongst veterans? And this is a theme I think felt both in Canada and the United States. I've listened to a few military podcasts that talk about similar sentiments there. Like, John and Denis, like, what is it that has so captured you? People who emailed me after the last episode to say that they're also retired soldiers who, one of them said, I probably submitted more Access to Information Act requests than anyone else on the planet to try to learn, like, what is going on with the resettlement. So what is it that's so touched either a nerve or a chord with you?
Mm-hmm. That was my question.
You want me to start, John? Because you can get a little bit more granular than me. The bottom line is they shared the risk with us.
Yep.
And by our count, 6 interpreters died while they were serving with Canadians. And that's a testament to the fact that they were physically beside us on every operation and absolutely essential for its safe conduct. So there's a bond that grows between soldiers in combat, and that's exactly, this is no different. The fact that they were not officially Canadian employees, but rather under some other contractual arrangement, doesn't break that bond. That bond will exist for as long as we're alive. So I think that's the essential reason why there's such a tie to them. And then the other thing is from a more practical standpoint, if you're going to take in people from other parts of the world, isn't it better to, I mean, I don't know if it's better, but there's an obvious advantage to taking in people that already know Canadians, that are already sort of half assimilated and that speak one of our 2 official languages, so they can get on with finding a job and being productive members of society. And that's certainly what's happened with the people that we've managed to get into resettle here in Canada. And I'll stop there because John probably has a more interesting perspective.
Would you go so far as to say there was a sense of culpability that in a way that the Canadian collaboration had potentially put those persons into harm's way, and that's why there was such a sense of like a feeling of a need to try and mitigate the risk that they were now in?
It's kind of two-part on that one. I could probably jump in there, Dennis, if you don't mind. But like for me being on the ground operating with these folks, like when you first get out on the ground and you're in this, war crisis scenario and you're kind of not sure what is going to happen, then all of a sudden everything happens and you're realizing that it's not just about the men and the women beside you that you went there with. It's also the people that are supporting you. I can tell you, without going into granular war stories here, like there were situations involved, and I can say myself, like these interpreters, actually, one of them specifically saved my life. I ended up collapsing due to heat stroke one day, and he picked me up, grabbed my backpack full of ammo, which I carried around for my section, and essentially kept me going. And that situation wasn't just one time; it happened on a number of times. Then if you fast forward onwards even further to the crisis itself, when they started reaching out to us, that brotherhood or that bond that was created doesn't stop when you leave Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan in 2006, never went back. But like at the end of the day, that bond continued after the fact. And then also that bond extends beyond that to the veteran community right across the country. At one point, Aman Lara itself had almost about 100 veterans that were reaching out to us in different aspects, supporting one or two former interpreters or guards that they worked with at the different various forward operating or combat outposts and stuff like that. And this entire situation broke the veteran community to the point where I could tell you right now that out of that 100 that I communicated with, I probably to this day maybe talked to 2 or 3 of them. So they've all just, it's too much. It's too much. And it still is too much.
Was it too much? Just the government's like the lack of the feeling of you can't do anything. So like in 2021, I had breakfast with some individuals who were talking about how they knew organizations that could get people, like private sector organizations or NGOs that could get people out of Afghanistan, but they felt like, almost, not to say that's the easy part, but like that they could do, but once they were out of Afghanistan, how to actually get them into Canada. And I wasn't able, I think, to provide any, the kind of the same, like there's big log jams, and that I didn't know of any ways to special paths outside of what was on the IRCC website regarding refugee resettlement. But that they were like, that was the big obstacle, was Canada's bureaucratic laws to that final step of they could get people out, but they couldn't deal with the bureaucracy.
Can I just
it reminds me, please go ahead.
1 second. It's just that here's the issue, and it's the issue with almost every government program. It's a process. It's not a plan. You cannot make something happen with a process unless there's a plan that backs it up. And there was never a plan. It was just, here's the process, sort yourself out. And if you're working off of your iPhone in Kabul and you have no electricity and you're being hunted by the Taliban and they ask you to fill out a 10-page PDF form because that's the process, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the fact that there's this reluctance to get involved because you might end up holding the bag, and there's a lot of risk aversion in the government. We all know that because we've all served in it, and unfortunately it's that risk aversion that creates more of a crisis rather than alleviating it.
Yeah,
that's the kind of 30,000 foot view, but I know John has multiple examples of how the process was most of the problem.
Yeah, well, maybe before, so I'll get back to the case. We'll just do 3 more paragraphs that kind of describe that process. So going back to the case, and then John, you can describe sort of the actual interaction of how this worked in practice. So, quote, on July 23rd, 2021, as conditions in Afghanistan rapidly deteriorated after the withdrawal of NATO forces, the minister, together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of National Defense, announced the policy to resettle Afghans who were integral to Canada's efforts in Afghanistan and who assisted the Government of Canada. As of August 9, 2021, IRCC's website instructed interested Afghan nationals to send an email with certain information to canada-afghanistan@international.gc.ca, which was created and managed by Global Affairs Canada. According to the respondent, such emails constituted expressions of interest and not applications, although Clark, who is an IRCC official who testified, acknowledges that the term invitation to apply was not used in the original version of the policy. Global Affairs Canada and the Department of National Defense were tasked with identifying Afghan nationals with, quote, a significant and/or enduring relationship to Canada, who would then be referred to IRCC. Upon confirming the referral and provided that there remained capacity under the policy, IRCC would send the Afghan national an invitation to apply, together with the formal application to be completed and returned to IRCC, end quote. It's quite a lot for someone hiding from the Taliban in Afghanistan. John, what sort of things did you notice?
Well, that just explaining that, how people expressed interest in different various ways, like that progressed within their processes over time. At first, all they had was an email address to reach out to. That then progressed to a web form based system. I don't know where that went after that, because I actually supported some of those interpreters that are actually still in Afghanistan to this day. And they have never been reached out to, responded to in any factor, because all they did was put an email forward. But then within the process too, like Denis explained, with regards to, you have 72 hours to fill out this form, but yet this individual is on the run from the Taliban. And this more or less was between the August timeframe, or what we should say September of 2021 and onwards, because most of those individuals were on the run. Because I don't actually think, and don't count me on the date here, but the Taliban government, or de facto government in Afghanistan, did announce an amnesty to those that served with allied nations at one point in time. I don't know when it was, but at the end of the day, it did ease the stressors a little bit on the Afghans that were on the run. But there is still that fear in place that's there. So that's all. And even to this day, when people reach out to me, and in all honesty, like, we have a basic inbox that just allows people to reach out to us periodically, and they still reach out to us, and they're constantly quoting to this day. I sent an email in 2021. I sent a request in through a web form in 2022, and I never got an answer back from Canada. What's going on with my case? They think that we're responsible for their case, and in reality, we're far from responsible for it. And we're trying to explain that to them, that it's the government of Canada's responsibility to process your case. We're just trying to do this advocacy behind the scenes, which was challenging, because we also had a project in place with the government of Canada that transitioned from Global Affairs to IRCC at one point in time. And that, like Julia had alluded to, that all concluded on the 31st of December of 2024. So I don't know if that kind of answers the question.
I mean, speaking to the impact on the veteran community, I'm reminded of something that one of our good friends and colleagues said when we did an episode on compassion fatigue. She said that I'm accustomed to hearing really tragic stories from applicants and from clients, but to have to grapple with the insensitivity, the callousness of the Canadian government, that was something that I had a really hard time managing, that I have a really hard time managing as a practitioner. And I can imagine the veteran community as well having that same reaction, to see the kind of lack of uptake for these really critical situations that it has, especially when you've served and you believe that you're serving for this interest. Is that what you would say was what the impact was in terms of how it impacted the community, or is it something different than that altogether?
Hard to answer that one, to be honest. It is really hard to answer. I think the impact is way beyond that.
Sorry, if I can just jump in from the perspective of someone who's looking to help the organization move forward and develop programs, and then I'll just reflect on the inbox that John speaks about. I would say on a daily basis, we get 100, 150 requests from people looking for support. And that's not just Afghanistan. It's all different regions where there are crises and where, unfortunately, you know, we're not in a position, and a lot of this, and I don't want to make this all about the funding piece, but it is something that's important for small organizations like us that are trying to, you know, continue with very lean resources and help as many people as we can. And it is heartbreaking that we can't respond to every request that comes through that inbox. And immediately, like, I want to get to work, put a program in place and pitch it. But there's so many things that need to come into place in order for that to happen, that it becomes so overwhelming. Yet at the same time, like, I carry that every time. I stop sometimes going into that inbox because I can't, yeah.
Yeah, a lot. And you know, just to talk about the processes and the planning itself, like when I eventually joined Aman Lara in the earlier days of 2022, January, February, started volunteering with them, and then around March timeframe, we had a real an actual project, a funded project in place with the government of Canada, and we had some funding to be able to get things done efficiently and effectively. I created a plan with the team I had at the time to go along with their processes. And in all honesty, it worked. The first month that we did this, we moved about 1,550 individuals out of the country alone. And then it started progressively over time going downhill because we were moving people too fast. They couldn't process them fast enough in Pakistan. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. Now, listen, I'll be the first to admit the folks that I was working with within the immigration department were top notch, and they were amazing human beings, and they were doing what they could. But that doesn't discount the policy that was put in place and the processes that were put in place that they couldn't control. Mm-hmm. So it progressively spiraled downwards over the period of probably 2 years to the point where we couldn't move anybody because of the wall that we were trying to get through within the bureaucratic side of it.
Do you have a sense of where that wall was? So, like, just to wrap up on the case. So in both of these cases, the government ultimately, so in both of these cases, the applicants submitted multiple emails. We're told, possibly through auto responses, that IRCC, was looking at their matter, that they could receive a response soon. Nothing happened. And it looks like global affair, so the response, it's not clear from the decisions where this gap or issue arose. Ultimately, the court ordered IRCC essentially to receive an assessment from Global Affairs Canada or DND. Do you get a sense of where the bottleneck was? Was it with DND, Global Affairs, IRCC, all?
It's a bit of all, to be honest with you, and it really starts from the time that we as soldiers were operating on the ground. And the people that we were working with and the contracts that they were under, because in all honesty, I don't think, without going into too great a detail, because it's a whole different concept and story, and this is not just unique to Canada, it's also an issue with other countries we work with as well, is that Canada didn't really hire a lot of individuals directly. A lot of folks were hired under U.S. Department of State contracts when we went into different various operations in the region. So the reality is that, kind of past the buck, I guess you can say, is the game that was played from various different entities within the Department of National Defense and Global Affairs, saying, well, we didn't hire these individuals. They were contractors under a U.S. program. But in reality, these folks work directly for us. And then you go beyond that, and it just constantly, you keep picking things up, and then hence why we have the court cases that are going on now that are, alluding to the fact that, that they didn't get entertained by expressing interest to come to Canada because they weren't sure who was working for who was the issue. And then essentially, the folks the numbers for the special immigration measures, in all honesty, with millions and millions of people, if 41 million people could get it at Afghanistan, they probably would try. So there was integrity or program issues there as well, but we didn't have an issue with that because we were so connected to the veteran community across the country. Even some of those individuals still serve to this day. If we had somebody reach out to us saying, I was an interpreter and I worked for 2 platoon out of the Royal 22nd Regiment in Quebec, I had somebody I knew could reach out to somebody and say, hey, does this case look familiar to you? And yeah, that was my interpreter, or that was my whatever, right? So we were able to confirm these. And over the period of time, Aman Lara collected the names of about 21,000 individuals. It wasn't until about March of 2023 when we were effectively able to go through those numbers and define and determine that there was about 655 individuals or primary applicants within that list itself that had not got to Canada yet, and were one of those individuals who expressed interest to come to the country back in 2021. That number has since grown to probably just a little over 800, because we've had other stakeholders come to the table since we developed that list, including Cory Moore, who has, I think, 12 or upwards to 60 individuals. This 655 to 800 list are primary applicants. That equates to about probably around 4,000 individuals that should still have the opportunity to come to this country, because they're still under gross threat in Afghanistan to this day.
Yeah. You mentioned that, in theory, 41 million Afghans would love the opportunity to come to Canada. I remember in 2022 in the spring, so, about 6-ish months after the Afghan initiative, which I think started at 15,000 and peaked at a cap of about 40, 45 or something. Russia invaded Ukraine, and the Canadian government announced the Canada-Ukraine Emergency Travel Authorization, which had no cap. And at the time, it was remarked, like, in theory, all of Ukraine could have been issued CUAETs to travel to Canada. I think ultimately 300,000 did. Did that, I know that, there were, while people were great, felt good for the Ukrainians, it left a bad taste in the mouths of some of the people who were helping Afghans. Did that reverberate? Like, did you feel the same at the time? Were you surprised, like, hey, Ukraine, the amount of resources that immediately shifted to Ukraine with no cap compared to what was going on with the Afghans?
Yeah, we did get involved in Ukraine right at the early onset back in 2022, and essentially what I had noticed almost immediately was that it was too easy to work through. Like what was happening in Ukraine was very sad. It was very explicit what was going on, but from a humanitarian perspective, it became a very flooded space, including Aman Lara getting involved in it, evacuating some of the interpreters that worked under Op Unifier, as well as some individuals that had been harmed in Kyiv with the initial bombings, specifically a hospital where we medically evacuated some individuals who were wounded, a lot of children who actually ended up coming to Canada through the QIT visa program. So it was very easy to navigate that process, but what was happening was it was creating a pull at the time for what was going on and being overshadowed in Afghanistan. So what I had done when I took over as the executive director later on in 2022 was I kind of worked with the board of directors, and we kind of moved away from supporting in Ukraine because there was other organizations working in the region, and it was we weren't added value. So we went back to Afghanistan. I shouldn't say we went back because we never left it, but at the end of the day, all our resources went back to supporting Afghans. Because the humanitarian community kind of jumped ship and stopped working in the region, and it stayed to that to this day, even more so when Gaza kicked off. So there is not many NGOs working within the Afghanistan space, period. I can say that wholeheartedly. And many of them that are reaching out to us for support. But again, it goes back to something that Julia said. We're getting to the point now where we don't have the funding to support them. A lot of those are women, LGBTQ individuals, and other populations that are extreme vulnerable in that part of the world. We're still working with a number of interpreters, like you said. We've got a large number of them, but we can't do anything until Canada acknowledges a policy brief that we sent up to the minister's office, both at the Department of National Defence, Global Affairs Canada, and Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, to acknowledge what we would like to do to continue to ensure that the job is complete, because one of the things that was announced going back to 2021 and 2022 was specifically around a special hearing committee that was put in place to ensure that things were done properly in Afghanistan, which, Denis, I believe you also testified within that, we must finish the job. We have a moral obligation to finish that job in Afghanistan. And to be honest with you, right now, it's not done.
Have those two mandamus decisions changed anything, or is it looking like anyone who has there been a general policy shift to say, okay, we've now lost 2 cases at the federal court, maybe we should, dedicate some resources to reviewing these emails that people submitted? Or is it like sort of head in the sand, if you want to challenge it, you can challenge it in court?
When our funding expired in December this past year, a couple months later, we actually sent out a survey to all the populations that we were left in support with. I think it was about 1,900 individuals, or close to 18 to 1,900. And essentially, we got a decent response rate back from those individuals we were working with, and some of them did coming to Canada in 2025. But we're also now hearing that many of them have received withdrawal notices from IRCC saying if they don't get to a third country within a period of time, their file will ultimately be canceled. I'm not sure what the time frame is. There's probably a time frame within it. I think it's 12 or 18 months. At the end of the day, some of these folks cannot get out of Afghanistan if they don't have our support. And we're looking at a point now when we're reaching out to various different foundations right across the country, and they're not willing to fund it because they're deeming this a government of Canada problem. And I actually can't even argue with them. The government of Canada needs to foot the bill to continue to support and finish the job in Afghanistan, period, point blank.
And if I may, therein lies the problem. If you look at the numbers, and I think the Special Immigration Measures Program got 45,000 people, or at least that's what they claim. It's a huge number. Most of those people were already out of the country. They went for the low-hanging fruit and then raised the victory flag. The people we moved all came from inside of Afghanistan. That's the risk that they didn't want to take, and therein lies the principal problem. It's why Ukraine is markedly easier. You get out of Ukraine, you're in Europe. You get out of Afghanistan, you're in Pakistan. I mean, your problems are just as severe. So it's quite a dilemma, and it wasn't helped by the fact that they started a program really that just accelerated refugees that were already out of the country and didn't help those that were truly under threat.
So what's in the policy brief? Like, what do you want to see the government do?
We specific. You know what, Julia? Do you want to talk about that specifically? Because you did a lot of the writing around that. Not to throw you on that.
I'd have to pull it up if you can just give me a minute.
Yeah, for sure.
And has the shift from Prime Minister Trudeau to Prime Minister Carney changed anything?
No, we've actually we've sent a number of emails to various different individuals within various different departments, and we have not received a single word back, to the point where actually I did get word back from some of the folks that we were working with within Immigration Canada thereafter our project concluded, and essentially they said, you don't have a project in place with us anymore. We cannot continue to discuss operational components with you. Where we know they don't have an operational component, we were their operational component, moving people from one location to another.
Yeah, you caught me off guard. The one. That's okay. So the most recent policy brief that we did send up to the current minister at IRCC did outline a lot of, what John and Denis have talked about in terms of, providing the moral basis for the work that continues in Afghanistan, the work that remains, to evacuate individuals. We did also weave in our work under EMPP, acknowledging that IRCC came directly to us and asked us to engage in that particular pathway or program as an option to support those individuals. We did make reference to the special committee report, so that John make note of, and also the fact that it's not just Canada alone that is working on these efforts. It is a broader global issue of other, allied nations that had or that were involved in the region that have individuals that they are also looking to evacuate or support in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, a lot of them in Pakistan. And we did acknowledge the fact that the numbers are not huge. Like, we're not looking at tens of thousands. I think John referenced, in total, and that is taking into effect that family members usually are comprised of 6 to 8 individuals. So it's roughly 4,500.
Yeah.
That we are the number that we're moving forward with. So again, like a lot of the initiatives that we've developed, or that are currently developed right now, it's very small numbers, but we're still trying to make small numbers, but a big impact. And for sure, this one, if we could have, something, a policy put in place to, as John said, finish the job, it would make a huge impact, because it's work that, it has been left unfinished. So,
yeah, I think my last question, just looking at the time, is, so in 2015, Prime Minister Trudeau ran on resettling 60,000 Syrians. Might have been less to start with, but it ended at, I think, 60 to 80. The Canadian forces, I believe it was called Operation Provision, was involved in evacuating. But the big thing was that this relied on privately sponsored refugees. And you saw Canadian families across the country banding together in groups of 5, where, the government, I guess you could say, did the resettlement aspect, but it was, the Canadian public welcomed the opportunity to help Syrians. And 5 years later, they didn't involve the private sector the same way. It sounds like they relied on the private sector, NGOs like yourselves, to extract people. But has it ever been explained to you why they didn't do something similar involving letting Canadian families, especially vets, band together to sponsor people?
Actually, believe it or not, most of the folks that we're working with now actually are privately sponsored refugees, and also through sponsorship agreement holders across the country. We've been supportive, very direct supportive of about 100 cases. And trust me, when I say that impact at 100, when we're working with 1,500 months prior per month, the impact that we're doing now, working with a group of, or various different groups in that number, is actually more stressful than it is working with 1,500, trying to move 1,500 people, because of the complexities within the region. Pakistan has announced mass deportations. They don't want Afghans in their country at all. So it's a constant roll in effect. We've actually, out of the 100 that we're working with right now, we have probably only had about 2 individuals in total that have not been touched or have been deported back to Afghanistan. And then now, with the border have been closed since around the 12th of October, we can't move people back. And again, it goes down to the funding aspect of it. We don't have any funding to do this. So, and the sponsorship groups, their funding stops at the door as it relates to the money going forward to their sponsorship. So it's quite problematic. And then not only that, with the recent numbers that were announced by Immigration Canada in the levels plan, really paints a very dark picture on the future of something that we're trying to do here. Like I said, our numbers are not very big that we're asking for here, but if Canada is intending on bringing 300 or 350,000 individuals to Canada over time, we're only asking for 4,000. Not only that, on top of it, I think our policy brief, correct me if I'm wrong, Julia, but I think it asked for a multi-year. So I wouldn't even do this in one go. I mean, I could do it in one go very easily, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to stress the community. I wouldn't want to stress the individuals that are coming through the process, because right now it's not straightforward getting people across that border. There are no entities out there that can really do it the way that we can do it in the plan that we have in place to get it done. But if somebody doesn't act on this policy brief soon, that plan that we have, or that operational component that we have in place there, is not going to exist anymore.
So does Aman Lara, it brings people in. I mean, the private sponsored programs pause now to new applications. I don't know if you have ones in the queue, but so they're mainly coming through privately sponsored or sponsorship agreement holder, not classified as government assisted refugee, or?
From what I understand, well, there are still some government-assisted refugees that we're working with. Actually, the number of them, when I talked earlier about some of those cases have been notified of withdrawal or cancellation, those are the government-assisted refugees. Those that are still in Afghanistan that cannot get out are the ones that we're talking about. So, and to my best guess estimate, there's still anywhere between probably 2,000 and 3,000 individuals that are in Afghanistan that have government-assisted refugee claims or file numbers in place to come to Canada. They just can't get out of the country without support.
And why withdraw the claim? Instead of just keeping it open? I get that it creates a backlog, I guess, that could look,
yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do, is deal with the backlog.
the
We're also
impression
seeing the backlog issue as it relates to our EMPP program. That backlog issue now, where we were trying to get people to Canada, was 6 to 9 month processing time. Now we're hearing it's 18 to 24 months. And then the employers we're working with, like, they can't wait that long for somebody to come in the roles that they've allotted for these individuals, right? So, and I'm actually hearing the numbers are quite a bit lengthy or longer. And then the numbers in the levels plan are so hard to understand right now that, well, I think you and Deanna talked about it in your last podcast a couple of weeks ago, that there needs to be deeper explanation out of it, especially as it relates to the economic pathways that are available. I was talking to a sponsorship agreement holder last night, and they were telling me that even the numbers for sponsorship groups have been slashed in half, like 54% less than what they had previous years. So we're going to see less and less available positions coming to Canada. If that's the only way to make this happen, is by a special immigration measures extension or new measures put in place to continue to support those people from Afghanistan. But I also understand too, there's other crises going on, and you need to support those in other regions. But we can't forget the people that work directly with us for, in some aspects, some of these folks worked with us for, 14, 15, some 20 years, in the embassy. So.
Yeah, I think there's a class action actually launched recently over the processing times of government, like dependents of refugees. So if someone came here and claims asylum successfully and they want to sponsor their family, I think it gets multi-year processing. In fact, I just went to the IRCC website, and yeah, it says that if you've been approved PR as a refugee and you want your dependents, your spouse and children to join, it's a 51-month processing time right now, which there's several programs that are similar. And yeah, we did an episode on how the humanitarian stream is now a 50-year processing time, which completely doesn't work. Any final thoughts? We're going to post a link where people can donate in the show notes. And again, because Aman Lara is a charity, that means you get a tax credit for any donations made. Any final thoughts?
The one thing that I'll say before Denis and Julia can put final thoughts in there is that if we don't do something here as a country to finish this job in Afghanistan, and it's already happening, is some of these folks that worked with us that are still waiting or have expressed interest, they're going to get hurt and harmed. They're going to get found. There are some in hiding. There are some that had done some jobs in different regions with Canada that if they're found, they'll probably be killed on the spot. We have actually had some folks that have been harmed, but what we have seen more of is that the individuals in question are sending their children who are older now down to the markets to get food, so the father doesn't get exposed and whatnot. And we're seeing some of these kids being detained by the Taliban and tortured while they're trying to find their father. So, and I've also seen some of the spouses captured and harmed as well. Like, there's a roll-on effect to this if we don't do something about this. And that goes to the stressors that they come to Canada with at the same time. The longer we wait, the more stressors that are in place and the more harm is put on this population that work directly with us. These are not just regular people. These are people that work directly with the Canadian military and foreign affairs in different aspects. Some of them, including even having worked in the embassy itself. As you stated, with Cory's folks, work directly with the individuals, with our Justice Department within the military itself. So, Denis, Julia?
I'll just say that if you're a Canadian watching this show and you're concerned about your armed forces being deployed in other countries around the world, where interpreters are required, you ask yourself the question, would you work for us if this was the sort of support you got after we left the country? And that's important. It has a strategic impact, and it directly affects how our forces are employed in the future. That's a bit of a high-level overview of it, but it's just as important as everything that John has stated.
No, and I guess I'll just add that on the funding side, what we do need is, sustained and predictable support that allows us to maintain our operational capacity. And it's not just funding to scale for the sake of scaling, our programs and our organization. It's that people rely on us. I think I alluded to earlier the number of requests that we get in our inbox that we just simply can't respond to without, programs in place. So funding really essentially allows us to show up for those people that we serve, those in Afghanistan, but then those that continue to come to us from other regions, and to show up in a way that's, safe, accountable, aligned for essentially the trust that's being placed in us as an organization, to support anybody that reaches out with and
I'll for sure be posting a link in the show notes. As I mentioned, I went to a breakfast with some people in 2021 who talked about different organizations that were stepping in to evacuate people in Afghanistan, and there wasn't anything I could really do to get involved at the time, but even the ability now to donate, which and just to be able to contribute is great, because I think both the amount of vets who have reached out and that sense of anger and I guess betrayal, and it just looks like a great organization to where you could basically where the private sector is stepping in to help get people out of very difficult life-threatening situations.
I hope my internet connection won't fail me again. It seems like my whole service provider has gone down, but and hopefully this wasn't asked already. If it was, we'll just skip over it. But I'm curious because the group of five sponsorship and all of that sort of thing has basically gone by the wayside. But I've been wondering about the people that would have undertaken group of five sponsorships during that time. I wish there was some way of funneling what was clearly public interest in supporting people who were looking for safe passage to Canada. Just thinking about ways to kind of redirect what was clearly public interest in supporting the most impacted. Even if there was some support. Not to say, and I agree with you, John, what you said just before I got cut off, that this really shouldn't be deflected onto the private sector, but I totally 100% agree. But it's almost like it's even worse because it's also retracting this channel by which public citizens can also put their philanthropic funding behind those who they believe should be given safe passage to Canada. So it's almost a double whammy. So I guess that's not actually a question. It just amplifies my frustration with the fact that they've then eliminated this pathway as well. And it's impossible for the charitable sector to kind of mobilize that same pathway for people to provide that support. It's just a rant.
Yeah, we touched on it a bit before, that there are people coming through the group of five sponsorship, but what's missing is the government really pushing it the way that they did with the Syrians. And I know actually that we have quite a few people in government, including at DND and IRCC. I don't actually know if anyone at Global Affairs, although if you do, I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure the books will be written in future years as to why there wasn't what seemed like a very successful resettlement of Syrians, why that wasn't repeated here. But
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I have a lot to say about the resettlement of Syrians, because I do know that there's a huge cohort of Syrians who have been accepted as overseas cases, but are still in in third countries abroad where they can't actually come to Canada and are at grave risk of being deported back to Syria right now. So, I mean, this is another entire problem, but, you know, so yes, not to say that it wasn't successful, but again, it's another, to my mind, incomplete resettlement effort.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, guys. Again,
Thank you
I'll
so
post the
much.
link in the show notes. And definitely encourage people to check out the organization, because I think it is a very unique charity within Canada.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing. It's really, really highly important work, and yeah, sticking with it, because I know it can be disheartening.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.